Hey, this is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministry. Welcome to Human Things 2.0, Season 2, Episode 2. All right. Welcome back. So for Episode 2, we have an interview today with, I'm very excited about this interview. It's with Dr. Ben Mitchell. He holds a Graves Chair of Moral Philosophy at Union University in Tennessee, where he also previously served as the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs. He serves as the editor of Ethics in Medicine, an international journal of bioethics, as a senior editor of Renewing Minds, a journal of faith, learning, and culture. This is a man who loves Christ and knows an awful lot about what I've asked him to come and talk about. And I reached out to him and asked him if he would talk to us about AI. And he was gracious to come and talk about AI and to merge both the threats and benefits that technology like that, super intelligence technology, has to do for humanity and against humanity. He's a smart man. And I'll mention this again later when he comes and joins us, but I want to give specifics. I'd heard him talk about physician-assisted suicide a couple of years ago, many years ago now, I think it was. And during his talk, at the same time, I think it was actually that same week, I had given a talk on physician-assisted suicide at another event. And so I heard myself, obviously, and I knew what I had prepared and how I had presented it. And then I went and heard him. And here's what struck me about him, that we operate from the same platform of ideas and beliefs about the nature of humanity, the image bearers of God, and all of those. But there was also this palpable love of Christ in his talk that impressed me. And as he evaluated information, he was unapologetic, and not that I am, but that his passionate defense of human life through a Christian perspective was refreshing. There was no part of him that was trying to act as if he were a neutral party. He had an educated, reasonable, sophisticated view of our responsibilities and duties to people at the time that they're dying, about our responsibility and duties to the world as people while we're dying. And at the same time, he shared those through the heart of a man who genuinely loves Christ. And here's the other thing that's important to me, who hates sin. And those two things were a big deal for me. And so sometimes in this world, you meet people, you hear them talk, you know they're smart people, but you don't get the impression they're good people. I've had a very few interactions with Ben Mitchell, but every time I had an interaction with him, I walked away from it thinking this is a smart man and this is a good man, or at least a man for whom being good is important. And so I'm so excited he's going to be joining us today. I want to keep this intro shorter because he and I will have a long and substantial conversation about things like AI and transhumanism and antinatalist view of human beings and all of those things. But before we get there, I do want to address one thing that I found interesting recently. I mean, I mentioned this, I think, last time when we had Seth on the show, that I go online before we do these and I try to find people offering arguments against the pro-life view that I can address on the show. And the problem is, on the internet right now, the arguments that people are offering against the pro-life view are absolutely, totally garbage. There isn't anything even meaningful to interact with. And a lot of it's very hateful and personal. I mean, they say things like, you're going to kill women. By doing this, you're assuring that women will die. And that trying to limit abortion is going to create an environment where women will die. And you can point to the historical evidence that demonstrates that as we produced more efficient ways of performing abortions, which we can talk about in a second here, what that means, the more efficient way of killing or destroying another human life. And as we got antibiotics and as we progressed in medical scientific knowledge, as embryology advances, as our understanding of what's going on inside a woman advances, all of these things, the number of women dying from illegal abortions just plummeted long before it was made legal. And so, as a matter of fact, if you look at the number of women who died the year it was illegal and then the year afterwards, they're actually pretty comparable. There isn't a big dramatic change. But that's not the problem. And the problem is that you're asking for the right to destroy another innocent human life, or let's just leave it for the moment as a life. You're asking for the right to destroy a human life because you find their existence a problem, what's the word I'm looking for? You find their existence inconvenient. That is exactly the word I was looking for. Thank you. Sometimes we forget basic words here when you get a microphone in your face. They are inconvenient, and you want the right to destroy them because of that inconvenience. And then you want to demand that you be able to destroy human life in the safest manner possible. I can understand the desire for people to be safe while destroying human life because you want the freedom to destroy it without harming yourself. But I do not understand why society is obligated or required or duty-bound in any way to assist you in that. It has not been our practice once determining something as immoral to do our best to help people to do immoral things in the safest way possible. Now, there are cases where we may do that. I remember needle exchange programs when I was younger, when HIV was spreading and AIDS was spreading, and it had been determined that intravenous drug use was a problem. Then there was a moment where we said, look, you are going to do these drugs, so we are going to help you do it in a way that hopefully doesn't get you infected with HIV. But that there's a protective element there, and we're helping you do something immoral. So I understand that. But the problem is that's a sort of libertarian view or a collective view of the society that is better for society, that fewer people have AIDS than it is that more people have AIDS. And so if we can keep the number of people who have AIDS and are transmitting HIV from through unprotected sex down lower by giving people who are going to use drugs, the clean needles that will help them keep them from getting sick, then there may be some pragmatic reasons for doing that. But when you do drugs, you are not intentionally killing someone else. You are doing something to yourself. It's self-harm. And there's obviously community and cultural harm. If you've ever loved somebody who's a drug addict, you know that fully well, that when they harm themselves, they harm you as well. But the issue there is not the same or analogous to the intentional destruction of an innocent human life. If we made it easier for you to do self-harm through drug use, but at the same time, we made it safer for the world by trying to keep the number of people infected by HIV low, by helping you to do this with clean needles, we're not making you do that. We're not encouraging you to do it. We're just saying, if you insist on doing this, let's try to keep everybody safer. But that's not what's being asked for. What you're asking for here is for you to be safe destroying another human life. And that's not our practice. And that we don't make it easier to destroy other human beings for anybody out there that wants to do it. Nor do we do, for the most part, a practice in letting you do dangerous things that will put other people at risk unnecessarily so that you can pursue whatever it is that you want to pursue. That's not the way the law works. That's not the way our community works. So when people say someone's going to die, we say, well, if we make abortion legal just to protect you so that you can destroy other human lives, I guarantee people are going to die. Every human being that you destroy through the practice of abortion is going to die. Every abortion is the successful destruction of another human being. Every successful abortion is the destruction of another human life. So it's not commonly the practice of our community to make it easier for you to do a bad thing in a safer way. And if we're ever going to do that, and if you want to point to something like needle exchanges for HIV, it has to be in extreme circumstances where, number one, the harm is mostly self-harm, and number two, the benefits to the rest of the community is not just to keep you, the individual, from having HIV, it was to keep HIV at a level where it would not be contaminating the entire culture because we couldn't control who was getting it and how they were active and who they were infecting. So this is different when we're talking about doing something to help someone do something that we think is immoral. That's the kind of complaints that I'm hearing about and things like, the abortion drug is safer than Tylenol. Like, first of all, safer whom? Tylenol, last I checked, doesn't destroy life. Whether it's effective or not is one thing, whether it's the side effects that come with it, as far as the organ damage that can be done from using too much Tylenol, is a good thing, a trade-off versus the benefits that you're getting for it. Who ought to take it and when? These are all questions that we could ask. But to say Tylenol is 14 times safer, or that RU486 or the abortion protocol, medical protocol, is 14 times safer than Tylenol, is ridiculous on its face. The abortion protocol is intentionally designed to destroy and end life. Tylenol is not. The comparison on its face is ridiculous. I appreciate, by the way, and I will make sure there's links to this particular episode to articles that debunk the idea that it is 14 times safer than Tylenol. But the idea that I need to engage with that at all, to me, is a category mistake or getting out of the area we're arguing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take RU486 because it's not safe. I'm saying you shouldn't take RU486 because it destroys human life. And to then go make some fallacious Tylenol comparison as if they were somehow the same thing is idiotic. It doesn't really matter to me if you can become so efficient at destroying other human beings that it represents zero risk to the person within whom that human life resides. It's great in the sense that I want human beings to continue to live and to thrive. And I don't ever want anybody to get sick. I don't want anybody to have to die for making a bad decision. But you can't make abortion legitimate by making it safer for the woman seeking an abortion. Because what makes abortion wrong is it's the intentional destruction of a human life. It's the unjust destruction of a human life. What makes abortion wrong isn't that the abortion protocol drugs are dangerous. What makes abortion wrong isn't that surgical abortion is dangerous. What makes abortion wrong isn't that women regret abortions. Those are things that are wrong with abortion, but it's not why abortion is wrong. Abortion is wrong because it intentionally destroys an innocent human life. And it's difficult to get too excited about discussing objections of that nature. So I'm still going to keep looking, and I'm asking pro-choice friends to submit their objections to the pro-life view to me. But as long as they don't rise to a higher quality when I find them online, I'm really not particularly interested in engaging those. I will, on an episode coming up, revisit bodily autonomy. I'm going to go back and we started off at an overview of it. Now we're going to get into more specifics about it on an upcoming episode, because that is an interesting argument for the pro-choice side. I think it's deeply flawed, but it is at least interesting. It holds that as something to be particularly thoughtful, I guess. So before we bring Dr. Mitchell on, I do want to cover one more thing, and that is this idea that we're going to be discussing today. In order to set the grounds for that conversation, we have to recognize that I did a tour of colleges in Alabama last fall. And the things we talked about, there's different ways to understand what it means to be a human being. And one of the ways to understand what it means to be a human being is to understand yourself as simply a physical being, that you are essentially nothing more than a biological organism. And in that worldview, which we would call a materialistic, naturalistic worldview, the idea that things like spirits or supernaturalism or God or angels or demons or anything, like, if it's not atoms colliding into atoms, then it doesn't fit into my view of the universe. So that materialistic, naturalistic view of human beings, biological organism, all we are, meat machines. Well, in that view, the mind is actually something that doesn't fit, because mindedness, the idea that I read, think, see the world around me, and then make decisions based on the information I'm given, that would call into question something that's not material. You have a brain, but you don't have a mind in that view. And the brain is nothing but atoms colliding with each other the same way anything else is. And so what that leads to is what we would call determinism, which means you never actually make a decision. You think you make decisions. You have the illusion of making decisions. You have the illusion of mental experiences, but you don't actually have them. What you have is a biological organism that exists, atoms colliding with atoms, and as a result of those atoms colliding with atoms, you do things that were determined by a biological series. Of biological event happened, biological cause happened, biological event happens, biological cause, biological effect, biological cause, biological effect. That's the way the world works. You have no mind. That's just it. So now let's look at the second view. The second view would say that you are a psychological being, which means that your body is unimportant, and all that's important is how you understand yourself mentally. That if I am at odds within my brain, within my mind, with my identity, with how I understand what I am in this world, if there's a tension between what I am in here and what I am here in my body, then the trump card goes to the mind. The body is just the vessel I'm riding around in. I am essentially my mind. This is of lower importance. This body that I have doesn't matter. It's not something that should be paid any attention to. Now, this is where we get to some of the issues we have today, where you have these different views colliding as we're trying to understand policy and obligations and duties to one another. If you see yourself as essentially a psychological being, then what you think you are is what you are. And the material world doesn't really get to do anything in that. This takes what was considered once a weakness in arguments. If I teach logic to a middle schooler, and a high schooler, and a college person, one of the things we'll discuss is what we call self-reports. There are objective ideas out in the world, and then there are subjective states. A self-report is where I tell you what I feel or how I think about something, and I can't be wrong about that. I'm not capable of being wrong about it. And that has historically been a weakness of that way of understanding argument. So if you and I were talking and I said, there's a question of whether or not body armor, I've got a Gatorade right next to me as I'm doing this. It's a question of whether or not Gatorade or body armor is more effective at replenishing lost nutrients after exercise. Well, there'd be a way to determine that. And we would run tests and we would try to control, and we would see how each one of them performed, and we would gather up objective data to answer that question. And if I asked you that, which one is better at helping replenish the nutrients and electrolytes lost during exercise and restoring you to a place where you can perform at an optimal level, and you say, I just really like yellow Gatorade much more than body armor. Well, what you've done is tell me something I can't argue with, because you're telling me about an internal state within you. I can't tell you you're wrong. That's outside of logical discussion. You say you like yellow Gatorade, I get it. But what you haven't done is answer the question, which is better? You've told me which one you like, but we haven't addressed the issue at all of objectively which one performs at the highest level to accomplish the objectives that they both exist to accomplish. Self-reports are meaningless information for anybody outside of yourself. I like cheeseburgers with bacon and mushrooms on them. You may not. I like Granny Smith apples. You may like red apples. I like Coke. You may like Pepsi. All I'm telling you is something internal in my state. And by the way, if I tell you today that I love Coke, and then I wake up tomorrow and you and I are talking and I say, oh my gosh, I love Pepsi so much. You say, no, you love Coke. You told me that yesterday. I'm still right. I get to tell you that today I like Pepsi and that I don't like Coke anymore. You can't say I'm wrong, because what I'm telling you is about something going on inside of me. So if I understand myself as a psychological being, that becomes the power of that all of a sudden. What has historically been a rhetorical weakness about it, which is that the information is of no use to anybody outside of me because it doesn't answer any questions objectively for anybody anywhere, has suddenly become the power of it. No matter what I tell you I think I am, I'm right. You can't argue with what I think I am, what I feel like I am. You're not allowed to. You don't have that ability. And if you ask, but what about this in front of you? Something else, some other objective fact, I just get to say it doesn't matter. Those facts, objective though they may be, are immaterial to my understanding of what it means to be a human being. What I believe I am, how I identify myself, what I understand myself as psychologically is the truth of what I am. And that truth cannot be argued because it's how I identify, not what you think. So that's another view. We had the body view, we had the psychological view, and then we get to what has traditionally been a Christian view and other belief systems, that we're a dynamic union of body and mind, body and spirit, that both matter. And we have to attend to the needs of both. We have to attend to the flourishing of both. If there's tension between the two, then that view makes sense of it. If somebody tells me that internally I feel like I'm one thing, but my body is another, that view makes sense of that tension because both matter. If you're just a psychological being, then the one doesn't matter and the other takes preeminence. And so it doesn't matter what that thing is at all. All that matters is what you are in here. And there's no reason to change it at all or to worry about it at all, because you can just embrace the identity that you have psychologically. But if there's tension ever in any of this, and that tension doesn't just come when we're talking about transsexualism or things like that. That tension comes up all across the board. There's people that are suffering from that kind of dysmorphia in other areas as well. But when there's tension between the mind and the body, that view makes sense of it, because both matter and they both have something to say, and we have to attend to the flourishing of both. And so when we have conversations about what we're about to launch into, we have to be mindful as we enter into it. What do we mean when we're talking about human beings at all? There'll be a group of people that we can talk to. They will come from that first group that I mentioned. They see nothing special about humanity at all, nothing to preserve, nothing wonderful, nothing mysterious, nothing beautiful, just a biological entity that exists. Augmenting you is great. Downloading you is great, because there's no risk of losing anything, because there's nothing there that's important. There's a transitional form between what was once one thing and that will become another. And getting past that transitional form in transhumanism or post-humanism is the point. I don't care that we lost our humanity. Humanity was never anything to be preserved. So that's important to understand if that's somebody that we're talking to, that that's the view that they hold, and that I don't hold that view. And so there's going to be some tension between them and me as we discuss what it means to be a human being and what's important to preserve in our humanity and what's not. Same thing with somebody who sees themselves only as a psychological being, that all they are is what's here, and that this embodiedness doesn't matter whatsoever. If they can somehow extend the existence of their mind beyond the body, then they lose nothing of importance because the body doesn't matter anyway. Well, I don't agree with that either. So embodiedness matters to me. If it doesn't matter to you, then we have to understand that when we have these conversations, it's not just the raw data of what can be accomplished through AI, through transhumanism, through post-humanism. It's not just the raw data about what we can do as far as extending life beyond. It's not just the raw data on what we can do to augment another human being. What's also being discussed is, what does it mean to exist now in this moment as a human being? What dangers to that existence are being introduced as we pursue? How much do the people who are inventing these things care? Or how much of it is actually the point to get past humanity? All of these things are at play. And if you think human beings are the image bearers of God, and if you think we are at our highest level of operation when we are loving God and loving man as our neighbor as ourselves, if you think the most important thing that you encounter every day of your life are your fellow image bearers that God has put you in proximity of to communicate his love and grace and mercy and truth into their lives so that they may grow more in accordance with the truth and more in a relationship with God, then what we're about to talk about matters deeply, because we're talking about different ideas of what it means to be a human being. And somebody is wrong. If you have three views of what it means to be a human being, somebody's wrong. More likely than not, somebody's right. It's not necessarily true. We could have some nuanced conversation about that, but between the three options that I gave, if one of those is necessarily true, but two of them are wrong for certain. And I think one of them's right. So as we launch into this and we welcome our guest in, Ben Mitchell, in a moment here, I want you to keep in mind, as we have a far-reaching conversation about these things, that what we're talking about goes beyond just what can we do with technology today. It goes beyond what are we experiencing with technology. It goes on to the very question of what it means to be a human being at all. And whether or not the advancement of certain technologies are about the preservation, protection, and flourishing of human beings, or whether the advancement in these technologies is about the abandonment of our humanity altogether. So let's bring him on. All right, now we want to welcome Ben Mitchell to the show. Ben Mitchell's the guest for three things today. He's going to talk about a number of things related to biotechnology, AI, and that area. That's why I called him. I want to say this before we start, Ben. I call people onto this show. I have people come on because I think when you have one point of view, like if it was just me on this show, you run the risk of not having people who think or see things differently. And in addition to the massive amounts of works that you've written and that I've read online and other places, I had the privilege of hearing you speak one time about something I had talked about, was physician-assisted suicide. And what struck me in listening to you talk about it was, even though we come from a similar background and we come in the sense of what we believe and what's important to us, you spoke about it in a way that was entirely different than the way that I talked about it. And I loved that. I love the idea that we can come from the same moral background, but have different ways of expressing the same ideas. And when I heard that, and I started studying AI, and I was looking in other things in this area where we talk about the advancement of technology and what it means for human beings, I just remembered that moment, and I thought, if I could just get Ben Mitchell on the show so that he could come in and we could have a conversation about this, because I know he thinks from a similar background, but he expresses himself and thinks through these things differently than I do, and have a tremendous value for that. So, or place tremendous value on that. So thank you so much for coming on the show and for offering up your 3 things for the audience today.
Well, thanks, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here, and I do appreciate the work of Merely Human. I think human beings are pretty special,
Yes.
And so I like the work that you're doing, and grateful for the opportunity to have a conversation together and to bring our various perspectives on the subject. So I do want to talk about 3 big topics, but they're under the umbrella, as you alluded, under the umbrella of technology.
Yep.
And the late Albert Borgman, a philosopher of technology, just passed away a couple of months ago, said in his book on technology that people approach technology in a couple of different ways. For some people, new technologies like roller coasters create exhilaration, and they just go crazy about any new technology. They stand around the block at the Apple store to get the new technology that's coming off the line, and people are exhilarated by these new technologies. At the same time, roller coasters also produce vertigo in some people, and I think that as we hear over and over and over again about new technologies coming online, new technologies being developed and invented, there's a tendency for us to either get a kind of fatigue, so that so it loses its impact, and so we go, oh yeah, it's something new, and don't consider its implications, or there is the temptation, I think, to get to use that analogy of vertigo to feel like it's just dizzying. I can't possibly grasp what's going on, and so we just kind of put our hands on top of our head and say, "Oh no, Lord, protect us from this." So, I think there's a middle ground. I think some technologies and some aspects of technology are exhilarating, but I also think that we ought to be technological realists and understand that technology can bite back, and that's one of the challenges, I think, for us to be able to try to anticipate the potential benefits and burdens of new technologies, and artificial intelligence is one of those technologies.
Yeah, and I think you see, one of the things I think is interesting about what you said, at least I've noticed it in the generation that raised my wife and I, our parents. You notice that there's a struggle as technology advances for them to want to keep engaging that technology, right? Is the world of the technological world that they knew and they were comfortable in is changing. It's interesting to watch how people, and even my age at this point, I'm watching how people are processing the advancement of change. A friend of mine who's just a little bit older than I am have had many arguments about things like the oncoming of self-driving cars or things, and what that means for the structure of the world around him. He has that, what you would say, what you term as like more vertigo, and so does some of our parents, where the advancement of technology, it feels like they can't process it and they're left behind by it and they feel threatened by it, and it becomes, I mean, they're not Luddites, right? I mean, we're not talking about people that just are afraid of technology. They don't want to move off and become Amish, but their ability to engage in it or interact with it diminishes their ability, or their inability to interact with it diminishes their ability to fully enjoy kind of where technological advancement goes. So, I mean, I know that's a more limited scope, but I see that even, that's why I wanted to bring that up. There is that deep-seated fear of what technology is bringing, but even on a more limited term, as it advances and we feel like it's left us behind, there can be a struggle for people to keep engaged in how the world is changing around them. Where for me, I've tried to be very intentional about keeping up with all of that.
Yeah, yeah. So you raised a couple of really poignant points, and I want to come back to that. So on the one hand, let's think about technology as any extension of the human body to do certain tasks. So well, I think our tendency is to think of technology as advanced technologies, but a shovel is a technology, a paperclip is a technology, any extension of the human body to do certain work. And you mentioned the Luddites, and I think the Luddites get a bad rap. And here's why. Luddite is usually meant just to be a conversation stopper.
Yes.
Oh, any new technology comes along and you don't want to adopt it. Oh, you must be a Luddite. Well, who were the Luddites? I mean, the Luddites were a 19th century, late 18th century, 19th century group of people in Scotland, actually, who were involved in the knitting industry, but not industry. The knitting, they basically had a cottage industry of knitting mills and looms. Families did it. They did it in their homes. They did it in little craft shops. And what happened historically was that industrialization came to Scotland, the factories came to Scotland, and basically stole the work that these and the products that these people were doing on a small scale, a family scale, and turned it into factories. And there was a man named Ned Ludd who was either a pseudonym, he may just have been a mythical creature, or it may have been a real person, but he was the supposed leader of the rebellion against industrialization. And so anyone who followed Ned Ludd was referred to as a Luddite. Unfortunately, some pretty tragic things occurred in Yorkshire, England, and Scotland at the time. And there were some people killed in the riots and rebellions, and so there were some pretty sad consequences of that. But the Luddites, if you will, or the people who became known as the Luddites, were really technological. They had looms. They didn't make their knitted goods. They didn't just make them with knitting. Knitting needles. They actually had looms, and they were craftsmen, craftswomen. And the same way that the Amish are not non-technological. They don't plow their fields with their hands. They use plows, and they're pulled by animals. They use shovels and but they are critical adopters of technology. That is to say, they look at their form of life, their way of inhabiting the world, and they ask the question, will this technology help us do that? Or will it in some way distract or take away from our form of life, in the same way that the Luddites did? And I think, sadly, Quentin Schultz, in his book, one of his books on technology, said, unfortunately, most of us, most Westerners, and especially most Americans, are unreflective early adopters of technology. That is to say, we are consumers of the latest technology without thinking about what its implications are, or without considering what form of life we want to live, and whether or not this technology helps us live that form of life. I have a colleague back at Union University, where I taught for 11 years, when considering a smartphone for his two pre-adolescent sons, said in a group of faculty members, I'd rather give my sons a chainsaw than a smartphone.
Yeah.
And there was a gasp. What are you talking about? And he said, and he made a really important point. I thought he said they know a chainsaw is dangerous. They don't know the dangers that can lurk in smartphone usage.
There's no, I mean, on that point, and I know we haven't even gotten to point one yet, I don't think, but
No.
but there, but that point is so important because I can stand in front of, I get the opportunity to speak in front of younger audiences. And so I can stand in front of a younger audience with a bunch of parents in the room and tell them, to the best of my knowledge at this point, and I'm not an expert, but I've done a lot of reading on it. To the best of my knowledge, there's not been a single study that has come out about the long-term effects of screen usage and the way that it's being done today that says that anything beneficial is happening and everything that we get is negative. I can sit here and list to you all of the negative things that are happening to you, both cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, by your obsession or your, by your use of that phone, the way that we use those phones, the way that functions in our world. And still, I know not a single person in this room will stop using it, and not a single parent in this room will restrict your access to it, even though there is not anything that we, and even with my own kids, I have to tell them, like I was telling my son who's in college, and he's doing great. He's doing fantastic in college. I had to tell them we're book readers in this family. So you have to take a priority. You have to prioritize book reading. If I ask anybody in this family what book you're reading at any given moment, I expect an answer. And right now, when I ask you what book you're reading outside of the studies you're doing for school, I'm not hearing it, but I'm hearing a lot about video games right now. And that has to be a recognition that there's something more important than that immediate satisfaction that you're getting. Because for him, he says, well, that's my downtime. I said, I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying it has to be properly ordered in your life. And that you have to understand that you need to learn to take enjoyment or reflective downtime from other sources of entertainment and not just screens. So it, like what you just said, is so important, I think, because in the sense that we know that there's negative impacts. It's not, I don't even think it's true at this point that we can say that we don't know that it's as dangerous as a chainsaw, ultimately maybe even greater dangers. And it still doesn't change the way that we work. And this is one small point I want to make before I turn it back to you, because I was thinking about this while you were saying it. Part of it is that if the Amish, or let's say that instead of being an unreflective adapter of technology or adopter of technology, what ends up happening though is that when you make that stand, you ultimately have to almost declare yourself that I am loyal to a particular level of technological advancement to society. And it becomes difficult to work on a smaller scale. Think about the idea, if you're working on a computer that's 5 years old, it's not going to function on the internet today. It's not going to be capable of keeping up with the way that technology is operating, because everybody designing websites and everybody designing apps and everybody designing interactive entertainment is going to do it at the highest rate that they possibly can to be at the forefront of what they are supplying to their customers. And old technology, and saying 5 years old seems ridiculous, but old technology struggles to keep up. And then that affects your ability to function. And so that's where I think we have that weird line, because you can see that fear of missing out that we like to talk about in people when they're looking at the world around them. That fear of missing out wouldn't just be about social interactions. If I don't have up-to-date technology, I'm out of date in my ability to interact with the world as it's being designed around me, and I'm falling behind. I saw this recently with a person in my life that I told, you should not probably drive anymore. You're not good at it. But that's okay, because you can Uber a lot of places and it's not really necessary for you to drive. And the absolute refusal to go that represented an interaction with a level of technology that they are just not willing to do. They're willing to risk their life driving. Right, they're not willing to get an Uber app on their phone and then trust that will get them from place to place. So there's such an interesting balance, right, between that idea of not recklessly adopting technology as it comes out because you just want to be advanced, and at the same time living in a place where I prefer a level of advancement over another level of advancement because I just refuse to move on to where the world is going.
Yeah, and somewhere probably in between those two is something that, like just being embedded in certain technologies, and we are, as you just said. I mean, it's almost impossible to live life without a smartphone now. Try purchasing anything without a credit card or a credit card number or other technologies. It's just part of the the challenge of living in this part of the 21st century, as it has been in the past, is that our technology, we shape our technologies, but our technologies also shape us. And
Yes.
it's impossible to extricate ourselves, really, and live in the 21st century. Impossible to extricate ourselves from some of the technologies that are just part of the air that we breathe and the water we swim in every day.
And
And
what? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, and AI is one of those.
Yes, and
I mean,
I want to get to that, but
yeah,
going back to what you just said there, because I like what you said, sir, earlier about technology and tools, because it's important to recognize that that is at the most basic level, right? The introduction to a shovel to your life will change you. It
yeah,
seems crazy to say that, but I mean, think about even if you read like Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, where he talks about things like the introduction of stirrups on
right.
saddles and how that changes the warfare, and then that ultimately changes the way that different civilizations survive or thrive. And so small, what we would consider not even technology, but just tools give us the ability to do more, but they also change us. But so now, yes, let's get
Yeah,
on to
yeah.
your actual three
Yeah,
things.
but you keep bringing things up. I need to talk with you about.
I love it. Yes.
For instance, you said just now, tools give us the ability to do more, and that's one of the things that technology both achieves for us, but also challenges us in some ways, or tempts us in some ways. So for instance, as you said, tools do enable us to do more and do more faster. We can dig a deeper hole, and we can do it more efficiently with a shovel. And computer technology is the same way. I wouldn't want to try to do the math that my computer can do uh, uh, at all, and then I certainly couldn't do it as quickly as the computer could do it. So it offers us efficiency, and that's good for some tasks.
Mm,
Digging holes, perhaps, or doing math problems. At the same time, technology tempts us to see efficiency as a trump.
mm,
That efficiency, just because it's um, faster and maybe even better, it's therefore um, obligatory. We
yeah.
have to use it. There's a kind of technological imperative to that. But efficiency shouldn't be the trump for every life choice that we make. To give you an example, this year, my wife and I will celebrate our 48th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. I'm pretty happy about that. I think she is. But what would it be like if we're sitting at our anniversary dinner, candlelit maybe, or and and reminiscing about our life together, and she looks over at me and says, "Ben, I want you to know you're the most efficient husband a woman could want." I wouldn't know what she's saying. I mean,
Yeah.
is she complimenting me? Is this a term of derision to be an efficient husband? And it's because it's a category mistake. That is to say, we don't. The metric by which we gauge relationships is not efficiency.
Yeah.
You mentioned your children. If your children said, "Dad, you're the most efficient dad. You're more efficient than the other dads in my neighborhood," what would that mean? Because we don't use efficiency as the metric for certain things.
Yes.
And I think technology tempts us to say, just because it's faster and can do more, it's therefore better. And I think we need to push back on that. And again, ask the question, what kind of life do we want to live?
Yeah.
How do I want to inhabit the world? And does this technology help me do things more efficiently that contribute to that way of life? Or is efficiency a blinder to the way I ought to see the world?
One quick story before we move on from that,
Yeah.
because I think it illustrates your point. This is one of my favorite stories I ever heard. Sean Connery was actually talking about this many years ago in an interview when they were making The Man Who Would Be King, and he said that one of the days where they were filming, They had to we had to go out to the mountains, right? And so we're leaving the town and we're driving out to this mountain range, and it's one of those places where the ground before you get to the mountains is flat. The terrain is crazy flat, so you can see for miles and miles. And he says, and suddenly as we're driving towards the mountains, we see this little dot on the horizon. As we get closer and closer and closer, and we get bigger, we see a man walking, just alone, just walking from the mountains. And we asked the driver, "Where is that guy going?" He says, "Oh, well, they have to walk from the mountain to the town to do whatever business they got to do, and then they walk back." So we said, so we film, and that guy said was so far out. So they film all day, and that evening they're driving back, and then he said, again, I see this dot on the horizon. We're getting closer and closer and closer, and we realize it's that guy again. He is still so far away from the city, and he's been walking all day. So they pull up, and Sean Connery said, we go up to this guy, and we pull up and said, tell the guy to jump in the Jeep, and we will drive him all the way to the town so he can not, and so the driver they said the translator gets out and starts talking to the guy, and the guy's waving his hands like that. Like, no, I'm not interested. And he said, tell him we can save him all this time. And so he tells the guy again, and he said he doesn't want to go. And he said, does he not realize, we can take a whole day off of it. He said, I told him we can save him time. And he said, and what did he say? And the guy said, I have no idea what I would do with the extra time that I got. So the guy's like, this is my life, man. And I know how my life functions. And you take me there, you think you're doing some great favor for me. But that guy's response is, my life's planned out just fine. And I have no idea what I would do with the extra time. It's not something that's going to be a great benefit to me right now.
Yeah. So that brings us to artificial intelligence, because it promises to help us do more faster, to give us efficiency. And it's artificial intelligence, as the title or the name implies, is really just a way of doing computation, or a way of collecting and curating data that we could do perhaps with our brains if we had enough time, but we don't. And so computers can gather the data, curate the data, or arrange it, and in some cases, of course, create new data. And AI is just a large, the term just refers to the ability of technologies to gather and collect and manipulate these large data sets of information, and they're all over. We don't even know. It's invisible to us, some of the AI that's part of our lives now, but some of it is visible. For instance, whenever you have the autocomplete, you're starting a word, and your phone or your computer finish that word for you, fill in the letters. That's a form of AI. Or all social media is embedded with AI, or voice activated either tools, technologies, or even to be able to change your voice into written language. Those are examples of artificial intelligence, voice recognition. And it's used all the time for mathematical problem solving, sorting through huge amounts of information. And it's the technology behind GPS and Google Maps and SatNav, Waze, whatever kind of directional mapping tools that we use. But it's also, it can also be associated not just with information we find. It can also power other tools like robots. We know what a chat bot is. Anytime you try to order something online, you might get a little chat bot comes up and says, do you have any questions? Sometimes there's a person at the other end of that, but sometimes people have asked enough of the same kinds of questions that there's an algorithm, a mathematical tool that anticipates what you're going to ask. When you ask it, it sorts through all of its data and gives you an answer that it thinks will handle your question. Yeah. And that's just artificial intelligence, and it's everywhere. There's no way to escape it. and it has lots of really helpful uses. So I think that I think that's where we should begin. That there are potentially good uses, and we're making many of those good uses as well. But more recently, there have been some worries that have emerged about artificial intelligence, and um, one I suppose one kind of um, blip on the radar was at the end of 2022, and the announcement that now Chat GPT would be available free to anyone who wants to log on and use it. And Chat GPT is a language processing um, uh, artificial intelligence that you can. I'm sure many people have already played with it. You can ask it a question or give it a command. Tell me about the Luddites, and it will generate an essay for you on the Luddites.
Yeah.
It goes out to its encyclopedia, if you will, of information. It gathers what it thinks, and it's not a person; it's a machine. But this machine has been taught, programmed to sort through the information and hopefully, and I say hopefully provide you with the information that you want in an accurate way, and then we'll spin it out in really pretty good prose. That is to
Yeah.
say, it writes a lot better than a freshman English composition is usually written. And so when it became available, and it was now made free to anyone who wanted to sign up. It had already been out there. You had to pay. There was a fee associated with it. Companies were using it for marketing, to write marketing copy, and other things. But when it became free, that changed. It was a kind of tipping point in which now it's available. Now it's going to be used, and it's going to be used. The big deal was it's going to be used by students to help them
Yeah.
cheat on their papers. And when I saw that, I thought, yeah, that's going to happen. But cheating's been with us forever, and cheating will be with us in the future, whether you have Chat GPT or not. So that wasn't the big deal to me.
Yeah.
The big deal to me, and as we've thought about it, the big deal to me was one, um, is the information that Chat GPT um, generates, is it accurate? Um, and then secondly, um, is using Chat GPT as a shortcut? Um, does it harm the way we think? Let me say a word about that.
Okay.
So, Flannery O'Connor and other famous writers have said something like this. Somebody said, "What do you think about such and such?" And she said, "I don't know. I haven't written about it yet." And the connection between thinking and writing is a really important connection. When we write something out, when we articulate our thoughts in writing something,
Mhm.
we think through it in a different way than we do just talking.
Yeah.
We think through it in a more systematic way. We choose our verbs, we choose our nouns, we choose the placement of those verbs and nouns. We put some words in scare quotes because they're meant to be a placeholder for an idea that we think is important, or maybe using a word in a different way. In other words, there's much nuance in writing, in ways um, that help us to think through systematically. We hope think through systematically what we actually believe or think about a certain subject. And so my worry is that Chat GPT, if it's used unwisely, will truncate or diminish our ability to think through in the same way
Yeah.
that I think, you know, I use a calculator. There's nothing wrong with a calculator as long as you know how math works.
That's right.
You need to know how math works for the calculator to be truly useful to you. Um, and the same is true, I think, with a tool like ChatGPT. You need to know how to think and then how to write what you think before you turn to a product or a technology that's going to do that work for you.
Yeah, and if Facebook has taught me anything, it's that people don't know how to do basic arithmetic. I mean, like all day for whatever reason, if I get on Facebook, and I try not to be on it too much, but if I do get on it, every day there's a new math problem that somebody's just posted that's just basic arithmetic, and to see the various numbers of answers that show up underneath as far as the answer to that problem. And invariably the right answer is in a very small minority as far as the postings goes, is a bit alarming. Yeah, you're right. And I would tell you, back to that point too, I think is interesting because my kids, my two oldest, all three of mine were homeschooled. One of them is, two of them are in college now. One of them's about to go to a private high school for sport. Has nothing to do with they are not being satisfied with homeschooling. But one of the things I remember when I taught them to write, I mean, I was the one that taught them to write because I love writing. Writing is very important. I noticed when you were talking about the difference between Flannery O'Connor's discussion about the difference between how we talk and how we write, the first time they start writing, they write how they talk. And so it was the first challenge was explaining to them what you say and the ability for the brain to hear it and make sense of it, and how a reader is going to read what you're reading are two different things. And you have to write how a reader is going to read, not how they would hear you talking. And it's very confusing when you write how you talk. It's disorganized. You're putting the wrong information first. There's a lot of elements that are going on. And that's always the funniest part about it to me. Whenever that endeavor starts, is that someone is always putting weird information first. So the order in which they're unleashing information on their audience through writing is the same as when they're talking. And for some reason it makes sense, or you can process it when they're talking to you. But when you read it, it's like, this is a mess. So you need to learn to be more organized with how you're presenting your information, because when you present it like you say it, it reads really difficult to understand the point that you're trying to make. So that skill is vital to be able to do. And to your point about cheating, by the way, I mean, I was not always a Christian. When I was younger, I was an atheist when I was in college and had no moral compass whatsoever. And basically I was ChatGPT for a lot of my friends. I mean, I'm not proud of that now saying that, but it is true. The idea of cheating, there were people who would come to me and they would say, will you write this paper? Would you help me write this paper? Because I need a paper done and I got to get an X grade. And I could write fast and I would crank out papers for people. So yeah, they're going to cheat. And ChatGPT was just J back when I was in school. And I would write a good paper for you and I would be angry. I remember one guy, I wrote a great paper for him and left him a note that you need to fill in X number of things because he has to get to 5 pages or whatever. And he said, I asked him later, I said, what did you get? And he said a B. And I got outraged. Like, what do you mean you got a B? He said, well, I didn't get it all the way to the 5 pages. I'm like, I told you exactly where to plug in things to get it to 5 pages, man. I gave you an A paper. I expect my grade. So yeah, you're not going to stop cheating, right?
No,
it's just a new way of cheating. I think that the way it affects human relationships is interesting. Also, to your point, also you said hopefully accurate. I mean, we know what they call AI hallucinations happen when you're talking about these oracle programs, these programs where you're going to them for information.
Right.
Why they're happening is something of a mystery that we're trying to figure out through programming, but that they will just randomly say things that are not true, have not happened, out of maybe some need to fulfill their coding to answer questions. They're putting in information that's not accurate just to get the answer.
Right. Well, the old saw that we learned a long time ago about computers was garbage in, garbage out. So if the wrong information is in there, and that's all that the program has to draw from, then it's going to produce bad information. And that's the case with ChatGPT. You cannot rely on it to give you true information, which just like anything else on the internet now, requires that you actually know something and have some tools of discernment so that you can judge whether that's right or wrong, whether it's true or false, or whether it's consistent with the historical period that it's writing about or not. You can't rely on it to do all the work for you, and that's the worry about ChatGPT is that again it may be fine for generating copy for marketing ads and those kinds of things, but if you're going to use it to do serious either legal, historical, medical, or other kind of work, you're going to have somebody who reads its output, who can determine whether or not it's in fact true. And there's a couple of cases recently in the law where attorneys have tried to use ChatGPT to do legal cases, and it's gotten them in hot water because it's produced wrong precedents for the arguments that they're making in their legal cases.
And we have a problem though with what you just said. I'm going to get right back to that. But what you just said is important because you said we have to be able to discern whether the information coming out based on our own expertise or familiarity with the subject matters. The problem we have is that we know that's not it's not a skill that people have by and large. And I say this, I think it was like 7 years ago. I remember a study coming out while I was teaching young people in a homeschool community. And it said that I think at the time, college students couldn't tell the difference between satire and news. High school students couldn't tell the difference between news and advertisements. There was multiple places of failure of people to be able to discern whether information, not even just whether or not information was true or false, but whether it was intended to be true or false, or whether it was intended to be selling something to them. They couldn't make any sense of that. And writing for, like I write articles for Christian Research Journal. And one of the things I've told people for years is don't trust anybody without doing your own homework, because even when I respond, I had a cottage industry for a while there of responding to New York Times articles. And one of the things that I found that was very normal for people writing for the New York Times, whether it was on the editorial board or whether it was a guest writer for the New York Times, was they would put links to their article that did not support the things that they were saying in the article. Right. But because the hyperlink was there, because there was a blue thing there, everybody assumed it was properly sourced. I said, go read the sources. They're making claims that they cannot possibly support, and they're relying on you not to check on it. That because they put a hyperlink there, that satisfies your need to believe that it's properly sourced. And so the danger of a mechanism that we've been told is superior intellectually to us and being able to produce information, and us not having the basic skill to evaluate it could have massive implications on human life.
Yeah. I want to come back to the massive implications because there are plenty of people who are at least they've expressed serious concern about artificial intelligence in general. Yeah. I want to kind of describe why that might be the case, and ChatGPT is one case in point. That the information has to be verified, and as you just suggested, we don't have the skill to do that these days because we read texts as flat. We don't consider genre, we don't consider intention of the author, we don't consider all those things. A text, because we read it on a screen, a text is just a flat text. That's how people read the Bible today. The Bible is just a collection of Hallmark card sayings for some people. You know, we just grab texts. If I hear another person say "it says," I'm just going to pull my hair out. It didn't say anything. Either God said it, or Paul said it, or the writer of Hebrews said it. Somebody said it in a context to a people in an era with a background, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And well, that's not how we read text now. We read it as a flat piece of cloth, if you will, that has no texture, no variation, no context, and so we're liable to the very problem that you have suggested. That if somebody says something, well, I guess it's as good as what I read over here, and then if they put some kind of marker that this may have legitimacy or should have legitimacy, like the hyperlink example you used, well, then of course it's true. And that's a real worry. So ChatGPT is a chat bot, so to speak, a chat robot. But AI can also be attached to physical robots. And I recently gave a talk about care bots. These are
Mm.
robots that will be used and are being used, for example, in caring for the elderly. And so there's a little seal, SEAL, animal, little furry robot that's used with some senior adults who are beginning to lose cognitive capacities, having dementia. And this little robot seal, is there to provide comfort. It's a care bot, but we're now using them and experimenting with them in hospitals. Robots that go down the hall, and they may be able one day to administer medications. They can certainly, carry um, packages or materials from one place to the other. I've seen that there are psych bots, that is psychological robots. Some um, uh, sites on the internet purport to have mental health counselors available, and in fact, it's a psychological chat bot. So
Wow.
you say I'm having a hard time today, and the chat bot will go through its data and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Tell me about it." And one of those resources got in trouble and had to change its website because, and you can find this online, change its website because people were writing to the psychological robot, psychbot. They were writing to the psychbot thinking there was a person answering their concerns, and in fact, it was just this computer generated conversation that was going on. And yet they were marketing it as we're a caring company with
Mm.
these trained counselors who are going to be there to help you if you have a need. And so they had to change their website and change their practices. There's a professor bot. There's a professor in one of the Scandinavian countries, Germany. Sorry, a professor in Germany who has a teaching assistant who is a robot. And so, if we can get a robot to teach history, and presume that the robot has all the information available, and if teaching is just about the communication of information, then why can't the robot do
Yeah.
it as well as a human being? There are pastor bots. They're in Japan and in other places. There are priests and robots that are being used for pastoral care. There's a Catholic um, confession bot where you can give your
Pastor
confession to the robot.
bots.
Yeah,
Pastor
pastor
bot. I'm
bot.
still. I'm sorry.
Yep.
My brain just locked in on that one.
Yeah,
Pastor bots.
yeah, a pastor robot. And by the way, if you ask Chat GPT to write a commentary for you or a sermon on a biblical passage, sometimes it will do a fairly decent job. Um, and so pastors will be using. There's no good reason to think pastors aren't and won't use Chat
Yeah.
GPT for their research, for their writing their sermons,
Ugh.
for writing their article in the church's online bulletin or whatever. Um,
That's a
and
higher calling, man. That is
Yeah,
depressing.
there are sex bots. We
Yeah,
we
I know
probably don't
that
want to go
one.
there.
Uh,
And then there are the care bots. And I'm troubled by the use. I'm troubled even by the terminology, as I would be a pastor bot. The terminology of care for a robot. It doesn't seem to me that robots can care.
yeah.
Um, it's not in the characteristic of a machine to care. Um, if you ask ChatGPT, for instance, certain questions, it will respond and say, "Oh, I'm not a person. I don't have an opinion on that. Here's some information,
Yeah.
but I can't tell you whether that's right or wrong, good or bad, whether you ought to do that or not do that. I'm just a robot." So there's something. I mean, we're on um, uh, a merely human conversation, and there's something to me really suspicious and maybe even dastardly about the notion that instead of humans caring for humans, we'll use robots to care for humans.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with our humanity if we um, pass that uh, responsibility on to robots. Now, again,
We talked about that a
just a,
little bit on a earlier episode too, because what you just said, I said, we can't outsource our humanity to
yeah,
technology, right? I mean,
yeah,
there has to be. It's one thing for it to fill a need because we
yes,
have places where we just can't provide certain kinds of service, and they would fill that need to be able to take care of that service. But what it can't do, and this also I think leads also in discussions of physician assisted suicide. I know when you read like Ira Byock's books on hospice care and dying well, he worries about the idea initially of the reason he started hospice or became so about pushing the hospice care in the United States was because of the idea of outsourcing the death of the generation that came before us to strangers. And this is even a step further than that. I mean, this goes beyond just now, instead of our loved ones dying and being cared for by people that they don't know, that have no relationship to their life, maybe caring professional people who have a passion and calling to be in that area, but still not their family and not their community in the real sense that you would hope that they would be there. Now we'll go even further than that and say there will be no human element there at all in the care of the people around us. It will be all outsourced to a machine. And whether it even makes sense, like you said, to call that care is a question that we would have to answer
yeah,
because it
yeah,
feels like neglect.
yeah, and the motivation may be good,
Yes.
and again, this is what we expect the tools to do for us, to do the work more efficiently than human beings can do it. But is this analogous to the question my wife asked me or says to me, the statement she says to me over our anniversary dinner? You're the most efficient husband a woman could want. Is efficiency the metric that we want for the care of our senior adults or the care of patients who are in the hospital?
Yeah.
The vulnerable. Is that how we ought to measure the good of care through efficiency?
And
So
that's
that
what
means
upset me. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. One more thing. I'm
no,
going to
no,
turn it back to
sure,
you. That
sure, no,
what struck me emotionally when you were talking about the counsel bot or the psychological bot,
Psychbot.
right? What the psych bot was this idea. And to give just to build on it a little bit, when I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show before, but there's a ministry that deals with college students that I work with, and that ministry during COVID had set up like a 24-hour hotline. It was doing things online, and when it set this hotline up, the point of it was so that when people had apologetics questions or theological questions from all over the world that were doing this through this computer and this online service, they would be able to call up. And what happened, they found out was that unexpectedly was that there was college students that were involved with the program from all over the world calling at all times of hours, but they weren't calling for theological issues and they weren't calling for apologetics
Mm,
issues.
yeah,
They were in emotional crisis and they just wanted to talk to somebody. And
right.
so we're talking about a point where someone is reaching out to be involved, to just be in contact with another human being, whatever that means, to be seen, to be heard, to interact again with their community in some meaningful way. People feel isolated when they're struggling, and the idea that we have set up a bot to handle that, and they don't know that if they think
Right.
that they're having a meaningful relational experience with another human being, and when in reality they're talking to a program, that is just soul crushing to me on some level.
Yeah, I mean, and the sad thing is, and perverse thing is that there were people who did report that they got help,
Yeah,
that the robot helped them. But that's again, that's a perversion. That's a disordered
yeah.
good, if you will. And I just don't think it's something that we should tolerate in the sense that we should just say, oh well, that's just the way of the modern world. I think we have
Yeah.
to push back on those things, which means that for especially as baby boomers continue to age and the next generation continue to age, and demographically we have fewer people to care for this large number of aging members of the population. We're gonna have to think hard about how we care for one another.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to maybe put some new measures in place, some new strategies for caring for people. And we're certainly going to have to expand the number of ways in which and the facilities in which we care for our aging population. And Japan faces this very thing. They marched out, if you will, this um, uh, uh, army of care bots, and then they found out that in fact there were massive problems
Mm.
in both the care and then also the use of the robots. They found out they still had to have a person check the robot for everything that the robot was doing. So it really didn't save resources. It didn't save time. It didn't save personnel needs. It just shifted them in a different way. The same is true of many of the jobs that AI is producing. Artificial intelligence. You read some reports, and they will say to you, "Look, we're creating lots and lots of new jobs." Well, it turns out that many of the jobs, if you're a computer programmer or you are trained in certain ways, yeah, you may have a job at a higher echelon in artificial intelligence. But for many people, the AI technologies are displacing you from good jobs and giving you lesser paying jobs or jobs
Yeah.
that don't require as much human engagement. So that's we're going to have to think carefully our about our embrace of artificial intelligence, and that's I want to go back to the worry that I mentioned earlier. There are plenty of people who are worried about artificial intelligence because one of the characteristics of artificial intelligence potentially is that it can self-learn. That is,
Yes.
I don't like the word learning in the way I don't like the word caring, but it can grow its own databases. It can grow its own information and its own and program itself to a certain extent. And so that's led to, for instance, the Center for Artificial Intelligence Safety um, uh, uh, gathering artificial intelligence experts and others in a manifesto, as it were, uh, calling on uh, calling on us to monitor and shape artificial intelligence in a way that reflects it as a global priority. In other words, here's what the Center for Artificial Intelligence Safety calls on people to sign on to, that we should mitigate the risk of extinction, that is human
Mm.
extinction. We should mitigate the risk of extinction from AI, and it should be a global priority alongside other social risks, such as or risks to society, such as pandemics and nuclear war.
Yeah.
So, so uh, the Center for Artificial Intelligence Safety recognizes that AI could not just be used for nefarious purposes, but it could actually outgrow our ability to control it,
Yeah.
unless we build in somehow, and we don't know how yet, but unless we build in some safeguards that will keep artificial intelligence in the command of human beings and not its own thing.
I don't know if
You
you've
know,
read Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Nick, I mean, and this is a guy, Nick Bostrom, that you just mentioned. I mean, here's a guy who we'll get into it, and when we talk about transhumanism, here's a guy who is a technological optimist in many ways,
Yeah.
who thinks technology should be used to not just to extend human life, but even to take us to the post-human,
Yeah.
future. But at the same time, he realizes in that book, he realizes that there is the possibility of a global catastrophic um, outcome
Yeah.
of superintelligence. And I've talked to Nick a couple of times, and it's
Yeah.
very interesting to talk to him because in his earlier years, uh, I would ask Nick, I'd say, well, Nick, just to pose a question, I'd say, well, if we extend human lifespan indefinitely, will we have a problem feeding the population? And he said, oh, well, we'll get a technology to take care of that. And so
Yeah.
technology was the answer to the problems created by technology. But he began to consider, certainly not because of me, but he began to consider the implications of some technologies, and he ran a program alongside of his transhumanist program called a program on global catastrophic risk, and superintelligence comes out of that. That
Yeah.
book, Superintelligent, comes out of that, where he worries that we may turn into a big gray goo uh,
Yeah.
as a
And he talks
result of,
about the
of
the
the
treacherous turn. I mean, those chapters where he talks what you were just talking about when you said we don't know how to control it, and Bostrom talks about all of the ways that we would attempt to control it and the ways that it could fail. Either the treacherous turn, where he says it may be that at some accumulation of knowledge, the program itself decides to fulfill its ultimate objectives requires taking paths and like the worst like possible popular level discussion of that would probably be like Ultron in the Avengers, the second Avengers movie and Marvel movie, where within seconds of coming to existence, he realizes that to serve his programming, the best way to do it would be to destroy humanity altogether.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
Bostrom talks about that treacherous turn, or it may be that the AI sees that if it doesn't look like it's cooperative early, it will hide its true intentions or desires until such time that it has the freedom to do what it wants. Or he talks about the perversion of our desires through its objectives, right? It's like, and I would see he didn't say this, but when I was reading it, I was thinking of it like trying to ask a genie for a wish in a way that the genie can't mess it up, right? It's
right,
the
right,
trouble of if it intends to do something negative with what you're asking from it, there's almost no way to ask it in a way that it can't be perverted into something bad. And so that's what I thought was so fascinating reading his, both what you said, this is a guy who's technologically optimistic and doesn't see any deep value really in what it means to be a human, doesn't see something there to preserve, but is looking to move past it.
right.
And at the same time, he recognizes, and through that book, they make multiple claims that are just jaw dropping, where a third of people who are working with AI aren't sure that there's any way to avoid basically human extinction or the destruction of human beings through the production of AI. The idea that there's almost no way to think of how we could constrain superintelligence if we let it loose, that
Right.
it would operate so much faster than us, understand the constraints that we're trying to place on us, be able to get around them. And it is it's an alarming thought process that you go through that we're intentionally trying to develop. And the one I thought was the most fascinating was when he talks about it's not even like giving it simple objectives could stop this from happening. Because remember where he talks about paper clips. You could tell a program, a robotic program, to give it AI that says just make paper clips. And from that, he said, from just that objective, it could become a tyrant in the universe if it
Right.
saw all of the universe as resources and materials to fulfill its objective to turn the whole universe into a paperclip producing universe. It
Yeah.
has no deep villainous objective, but because it can become perverted or treacherous in its application of even simple objectives, it just represents an existential danger that we can't possibly understand.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all it's doing is just working with its numbers.
Yeah,
There's no intention. There's no will.
yeah,
It's just crunching numbers, and without regard to the carnage, the human carnage along the way. Eliezer Yudowsky, who is an AI expert and AI technologist, says if someone builds a too powerful AI, that could mean that every member of the human species dies shortly thereafter.
yeah,
So we're kind of at a precarious point, and we should have learned something from history. Uh, After the Manhattan Project, big project to build nuclear weapons. We were so worried about the possibility of the annihilation of human beings through
Yeah.
nuclear weapons that we said, maybe we should be thinking about the ethics of the technologies, at least um, ideally before, but at least along with the development of the technology. So when the Human Genome Project came around, and there was a worry about manipulating the human genetic blueprint in ways that might end up destroying humanity. The Human Genome Project included 5 to 7% of its budget for the ELSI component, ethical, legal, and social implications or social issues of mapping and using genetic technologies for human well-being. The LC component. Well, there is no LC component in an AI. Nobody
Yeah.
nobody sat down and said, now before we develop these technologies, before we let Chat GPT out there for everybody, we need to think through the ethical, legal, and social implications. Some of the legal implications are as important as any of the others. I mean, who owns the information through copyrights that Chat GPT is drawing from? There's another program called Dolly that is the art program. So you can tell Dolly, draw a picture of yourself, of Jay. Draw a picture of Jay as Coco the clown, and Dolly will generate an image of you in a clown outfit, and no one would know that it's not something that an artist did. It's computer generated
Yeah.
technology, and we've all seen enough CGI in the movies to realize that sometimes it's almost impossible, and getting more impossible to tell reality from the computer generated
Yeah.
images. So who owns the copyright? Who owns the trademark? Who owns the material that's generated by ChatGPT? Can you copyright it? So there are huge intellectual property questions, those legal questions. We're talking about some of the social issues. So we need the time to think about those things, and there a group of AI technologists called for a 6 month moratorium. But some of those technologists, including Elon Musk and others, we're going to continue to work on their technology
Yeah.
while we have a 6 month moratorium to talk about it.
The same thing
So
happened, by the way, with CRISPR, right? And same
yeah,
way, right?
yeah,
When CRISPR comes out, you immediately have people recognize the danger of what can be done through this type of genetic editing. You have a group of people that say, maybe we should take a second and catch our breath and try to evaluate the dangers of what it is that we're developing here and just hold off, particularly on germ level changes. We don't
right,
want to do things that are going to change it, that can be heritable traits. And while they're all sitting around saying, let's not do this, it's done. And then
right,
obviously the gentleman in China who did the work on HIV and trying to make it so you had heritable traits of people who could no longer contract HIV, he ended up being punished for it. He went to jail. He lost his ability to work in that area for the rest of his life. He was sanctioned by the Chinese government. But it just went to demonstrate what you were just saying.
yeah,
Everybody can get together and say that there's a problem here and we need to slow down, but it won't happen because
right.
everybody's going to keep pursuing because they know to slow down right now because there's intellectual convergence on these ideas is amazing. I mean, people like to think of these single geniuses out there that are creating things, and really there's a race to get to the finish line from multiple people usually when we talk about these things. The problem that I see,
And what the finish line is in most cases, not every, but in
yeah,
most cases, is the dollar.
yes,
Follow the money. I
yes,
mean, Microsoft gave $10 billion to purchase the rights to Chat GPT kinds of technologies.
yeah,
$10 billion. Because right now it's the Wild West. Everybody's out there prospecting to see if they can be the people who make the most money out of artificial intelligence. Sometimes for good uses, sometimes they could care less about the use. They just want to be the first one there who can capture the most amount of capital. And yeah, I mean, they're going to keep doing it as long as they think there's a fortune at the end of the rainbow,
Yeah,
a
and
pot of
Elon Musk,
gold
who
at the
you
end of the rainbow.
mentioned, says Elon said he said in one sense he's worried about what's going to happen and he thinks there needs to be a moratorium. But I've also heard him say in public speeches or in interviews that the reward for being able to, if it could be controlled and if it could be beneficial to human beings, let's say all of that was controllable and we could do that, the reward for AI is that the understanding of the global economy will change. There'd be no limits on what we could actually produce resources wise, and the financial constraints that you see on what we could produce now would just melt away. The amount of money that could come from doing this successfully is incalculable. We're not even capable of understanding what it would ultimately do to a
Right,
global economy. So you
right.
have a guy who knows this is dangerous, but at the same time, he recognizes if it could work, the amount of money we're talking about is something we can't even fathom.
Right, right. Well, let's not make paper clips.
That's right.
Yeah, well, let's go to transhumanism just briefly, if you don't
Yes.
mind.
Oh, no, no, I'd love it.
So this follows on because transhumanism is a kind of optimism about the use of technology to extend human life through a number of different technologies to extend human life so that we are transitional humans on our way to being something post-human.
Yes.
So Nick Bostrom and Julian Savulescu and others in Oxford and other places around the world are part of it's not just a philosophical movement. It's a technological movement as well to use either genetics or computer technology or other technologies to extend human lifespan indefinitely or realizing the limitations of this carbon based body, um, uh, upload our consciousness
Yes.
into a vast neural network like the internet. Um, so to escape the limitations of our embodiment, because in transhumanist terms, all those limitations of intellect, which is a feature of our brains, intellectual limitations of age and muscle mass and the regular senescence of our cells, etc.
Mm.
All of that, all those limitations are something we ought to try to um, ameliorate or totally eradicate, totally remove all those limitations because they're all viewed as bad. Our embodiment is bad, and that's one of the features I think that we miss sometimes in uh, thinking about um, our embodied condition. Is there's a temptation of self-loathing.
Mm.
Oh, I can't. When I get older, I can't do the things that I used to do. I can't. You mentioned I can't. I probably ought not be driving now.
Yeah.
And that's a limitation. It's a limitation of age, and if we live long enough, we're all going to get to the place where we shouldn't be driving. Um, but we have become addicted to our technology and its ability to get us wherever we want to, when we want to. We don't have to wait on the Uber driver. We don't have to wait on the train to meet its schedule. We can do that as we wish, when we wish. So our technology then reminds us of our limitations, and we rebel against those limitations rather
Mm.
than saying, you know, that's what it means to be human. And
Yes.
just as there were limitations that I had when I was born, there were certain things I couldn't do. I couldn't write an essay. I couldn't carry on a conversation. Didn't know language skills. Didn't have language skills, etc., etc. We don't say those limitations are bad. We say that's what it means to be at that stage of life.
Yeah.
You're a growing human being, developing your skills and abilities, and at the other end of life, and this goes back to our questions about assisted suicide and euthanasia. At the other end of life, rather than accepting those limitations and and working in communities to address ways to help people live successfully with those limitations, we decide it's a bad thing, and that if we can't end our own life or don't want to end our own life, then we're going to have to find a way to cure aging.
Yeah.
And the way you cure aging is to get out of this body, because this body is going to age. No matter how, I mean, even if we could extend human lifespan, to 400 years, eventually you still die.
Yes.
So transhumanism offers us the promise of technologies to escape this mortal coil, and to have eternal life, in a world in which our conscience, think the Matrix,
Yes.
the movie The Matrix, that our consciousness, I should say, lives eternally without a body. Or with Matrix, we could have multiple bodies in multiple different platforms. So this is the next stage of our technological evolution, if you will.
But in
The
like,
post-human.
particularly if you talk like reading Ray Kurzweil, right? I have to say, I am astonished at his optimism that he believes that whatever would be uploaded would be him. And it's one of the things that I've never fully understood when I'm talking to the transhumanist or post-humanist that are thinking of the idea of uploading our consciousness and releasing it as a program that will live forever. Like, in what meaningful way do you believe that that's you that exists?
Right.
I don't understand why. And Kurzweil, his argument, I think he does it in his book on the singularity, where he talks about every time we have got more information, we've refined ourselves and become more of what we are. So he sees the accumulation of intelligence and the ability to process as his way of finding out who possibly Ray Kurzweil genuinely is, right? I mean, in the sense that it will ultimately make him what he is at the highest level of what he could be, without the restraint, like you say, of the mortal coil, without the body embodiment slowing him down. And I am stunned by that optimism. I was like, how can you possibly believe that what survives is you in any meaningful sense?
Right. Well, I don't know whether you've seen the documentary about him, called Transcendent Man. It's worth seeing, but it's pitiable in many ways, because, for instance, he believes exactly what you just said, Jay. He has collected, and, like a museum, all of his late father's journals, musical instruments. He was a concert instrumentalist. All of his tax data, all of the information about his father, in hopes that one day he can put all that information together in a digital form, and out will come his father.
Yeah.
As if we're just the accumulation of data.
Yeah.
We're just as one computer developer said, one inventor said, we're just computers made of meat.
Meat
You
machines.
just put the data in, and you get Ray Kurzweil, or you get his father. And I think it's philosophically and certainly theologically suspect. And it's certainly overly optimistic, I think, about the way technology is going to work, even in 2035 or 2050, depending on which timeline you're on. And as you alluded, there's the idea that our consciousness lives outside of embodied humanity. I think I think it's a mistake, and I don't think it's true.
And it's the difficult thing of dealing with it. I did a talk for Summit Ministries where we talked about this. When I was asked to come in and talk about transhumanism, post-humanism, and I was like, the hardest thing for wrestling from it from our end, I would say as a Christian, for me, let make it in what thing I can speak authority on. For me, is that the difficulty here is that I want to make the case that there are aspects of our humanity that are worth preserving that will be lost through this enterprise. The problem is that the people who've embraced this view see nothing about our humanity worth preserving. Their intention is to move beyond humanity, to force evolution. The hubris and also at some point or another, probably reality, which they say that we may be the first being that has existed in the timeline in which we're evaluating that can control the next stage of evolution. And so we don't have to wait for environmental pressures and genetics to work itself out. We're capable of making this next leap. And when you say, but there's no we that's going to be on the other end of that, you're not building a brave new world for you. You're going to create a new thing that exists and either in cooperation with us, either with us, but with no relationship with us, or at our expense without us. But it's not us. It's not human beings evolving into something else. It is the loss of humanity that you're talking about, the abandonment of humanity.
Right, right. And for the first time in history, the technologist has become the technology.
Yes.
That is, we become the object of our technological engineering in ways that we never have before, never been able to before. But let me go back to what you said about just for you. No, you said you're a Christian, and if you're a Christ follower, then it seems to me that with all the Christians down the ages, we can say that embodiment matters because Jesus Christ came to us as an embodied human being. In Christ, our bodies became sacred, if you will. They were because we're made in the image of God as well. But the embodiment of the second person of the Trinity sacralized human embodiment in ways that are mysterious, but also transformative in our world and in our lives. So it's not just you. It's about 2,000 years of Christian belief and practice. So let me move to the third thing we were talking about. So here we have the technological optimism of AI writ large and transhumanism, if you will. But this self-loathing takes another turn in what is now, I guess the best label is Anthropocene anti-humanism. And I'm working from a couple sources now, but there's a new book by Adam Kirsch, who's a science journalist, he's not a scientist himself, but he's a journalist, called The Revolt Against Humanity. The Revolt Against Humanity, Imagining a Future Without Us. And what he argues in this book, and he's using other sources to make his argument. What he argues in the book is that we've already reached a point of no return in global warming and the pollution of the environment. The Anthropocene is that period, that era of geological history in which human beings came to manipulate the geography of the Earth. It's about 1950 is when most people mark that period of time, just as there was the Pleistocene past or the Paleocene past. Now there's the Anthropocene now and future. And we've reached a point of no return. The Earth is eventually going, because of our way of manipulating it, polluting it, corrupting it, etc. It's not going to get any better unless, and this is the anti-humanism part, unless human beings cease to exist. And so now the self-loathing takes its final turn, and the Anthropocene anti-humanism argument says that what we ought to do is engineer in through genetic engineering or other means the end of humanity, so that we can't reproduce, and eventually human beings will just go extinct, and then the Earth can return to its pristine condition. We will not have so corrupted um, uh, the planet that it will cease to exist once we're gone. He says in the book that this is a sentence, that the death of humanity is a sentence we've justly passed on ourselves.
Oh,
So we ought to just go gently into that good night, to quote another well-known uh, cultural source. We ought to just go gently in that good night, stop reproducing, and the world will go back to its pure beginning. And there are so many things to say about that. I mean, it is again kind of a human self hatred. There's a naivete about it. I don't know whether Kirsch has walked in the woods or not, but there's death all over the place in the environment, and it wasn't caused by human beings. There's animal predation. There is the decay of the leaves and so in the compost of the soil. There's all kinds of death and destruction, as Hume said, and others have said, that nature's red in tooth and claw, and the fact that human beings cease to exist will not return the earth to any pristine condition.
yeah.
It's still a pretty brutish place, quite apart
Oh,
from
yeah.
the ways in which we may have dirtied our own nest. It's still is not quite as utopian as some scientists make it out to be.
There's an interesting thing too. I've noticed. I don't know what the algorithm or the AI that runs Instagram seems to be hypersensitive to anything I look at for more than 2 seconds. And every once in a while, I may look at a reel or something, and then for the next few days, I get that same some quality of that reel every 5 minutes coming across my feed if I look at it. And one day, I have no idea why, but I got on some animal video where it was a natural video, a naturalist video watching animals kill each other. I don't have the slightest idea why somebody posted that, and I have an idea why I lingered on it for too long. But then I get inundated with animals killing each other. The craziest thing about it to me was how many people in the comment section were furious with whoever was filming that they weren't stopping it from happening, as if there was some moral problem happening. Are you guys unaware of how the natural world works? I mean, that it's just that brutal and awful. Where I know you've grown up watching Disney movies, and I was a big fan of them myself, but I never allowed myself to believe that was how they actually were. Right? They're not sitting around thinking about their future and hoping they can become a chef or whatever. They are trying to kill each other all the time. It's a survival game 100% of the time. And so it's fascinating to think of that time. And that antinatalist view that we talk about oftentimes has corrupted the younger generation in a weird way, where they think they shouldn't have kids, that they're doing something morally wrong. They call people who have more than one kid breeders. They believe that they're doing something great for the world by just ceasing to exist. What a horror. I had a conversation with a young man, and I think it was Memphis. And it was after one of my talks. And he had confronted me during a Q&A about this idea of overpopulation. So he came up to me, and he and I were chatting, and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Who was it that convinced you that human beings were problems? I mean, that just the existence of humanity was a problem. Someone convinced you along the way that we are a problem that must be solved. And if you stop thinking of us that way and actually think of us as problem solvers, as people who, when we work together, we can accomplish amazing things to the benefit of our fellow man. If the problem isn't the person standing next to you is at competition with you for resources, the problem is that we're not cooperating the way that we ought to address the issues that need to be addressed, because we're blocked by so many other things. Sometimes just petty jealousy, sometimes it's the greed, whatever, fear of our neighbor, whatever it is, it's stopping us from being able to maximize the things that we can accomplish if we work together. I was like, young man, if you take nothing away from this conversation today, stop thinking of human beings as problems and start considering that we may be problem solvers that can deal with these issues more efficiently if we just stop thinking we're something that needed to cease to exist. That is such a horrifying way to understand what it means to be a human being.
Well, it is. I mean, and the naivete is breathtaking.
Yeah.
We have saved some species from extinction through human efforts. We've saved them from extinction. My namesake, my youngest nephew, just graduated from vet school. He's giving his life to care for animals, many of whom have health needs that are not a result of humanity. They're just part of what it means to be a dog or a cat or a horse or a bird. And then, as you're saying about overpopulation, that myth doesn't want to seem to die. We're not reproducing ourselves, and at least in the U.S., we're not perpetuating the humanity, and the ways in which we have addressed the problems associated with potential overpopulation through water purification and food production. We can go on and on and on. Just as you said, in the ways in which we've appropriately used technology to help humans flourish and animals flourish, for that matter. The naivete is breathtaking, and I'm glad you have an opportunity to help straighten folks out along the way.
And like you just said, the things that we've done. I mean, I just wrote an article for Christian Research Journal about how we've used CRISPR to change the lives of people with sickle cell disease, and the things that are capable of being done beyond that. I mean, certainly there's dangers, and this is the same thing. It's interesting. I just heard a guy. I think it was Thursday. I was driving to Tampa with a couple of my family members, and I said, "You guys can sleep. I'm going to be listening to AI podcasts all day." I know y'all don't care about that. And so as I'm driving down and listening to these, I just came across one that had to deal with biotech as well. And he made this that kind of brought together what I've been studying, what we're talking about today when I was doing some of the CRISPR research. Said that the division between biology and information is gone when you're starting to talk about it, because all genetic information is now to be understood as bits and as code. And so the walls are breaking down. So when we're talking about superintelligence, and we're talking about AI, and we're talking about transhumanism, and we're talking about the development of intelligence and the ability to understand information, this guy's making the point that even our biology, as far as genetics, is now information, and the ability to adjust that information is growing every day. So that all distinctions are dropping, and it's all going to fall into the purview of this ability to process massive amount of information quickly, and what that will ultimately do to humanity. And when you talk about this idea of hating humanity, right, of seeing us as a problem that needs to be eradicated, as if whatever is left when it's over is going, like you said, it's going to be the Garden of Eden, and go study chimpanzees for a second. I'm just not terribly interested in vacating the world so that they can violently kill each other. I mean, it's just not my goal in life to try to eliminate humanity so that animals can continue to treat each other horribly as well. We're a part of this world, and it's so difficult. I'll end with this on this and then turn it back over to you. I was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, many years ago, a couple of decades ago, with my wife, and I was talking to this guy. We were discussing the reintroduction of wolves into Wyoming areas, particularly Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park. The introduction of wolves at the time was to help care for the elk population that had gotten out of control. And he and I were chatting about it, and I said, what is, for you? I said, I know why. I have no problem with the reintroduction of wolves. I love wolves. I think it's a really cool. And we did the wolf tracking thing when it happened to try to figure out where the pack was at any given moment. I said, but for you, I want to talk about from your point of view, what is the goal of the reintroduction of wolves? And he said, well, we want to be able to talk about, or we want to be able to deal with the elk population in a way that is natural. I said, okay, so you're a naturalist, right? You're a materialistic naturalist. He was not a religious man, not a believer in God or theism or anything like that. So can you help me understand something? And he said, what? I said, you have scheduled hunts and ways of taking care of culling it back with human beings, but you want to do it naturally. And he said, yes. I said, in what way, in your worldview, are human beings existing outside of the natural order? Why do you see us as something unnatural? By your understanding of what human, and I said, I support the wolf thing. I think it's pretty cool. I like the project just because I like wolves, and I'm behind you on this. But what I don't understand is why you, who understand everything from this idea of materialistic naturalism, sees one thing as being unnatural within the materialistic naturalistic universe that you seem to love so much, and that's human beings. Everything else is natural, and we're unnatural and in some way a violation of this great nature. It's like, I can't possibly grasp how you get to that distinction. And he had no answer. I mean, this was an academic naturalist that was working in that area. He said, I'm sorry, sir. He said, I honestly have no idea how I'm supposed to answer you. I see now, as you say that, I feel like I've made some mistakes as I'm processing things around me. Like, yeah, we're a part of the natural world. If that's the way you understand the world, we're a part of this world. We're a part of this ecosystem. We're a part of this community. We have a role to play. This fatalistic idea that we need to be wiped out is horrifying. And the level that it's corrupted young people, even in ways that they don't fully understand, that they see having kids is bad and continuing the human communities is bad. And they want to minimize our impact on the world. Don't minimize our impact. Let's just make it more positive. We don't have to not have any impact. We can just make a good impact on the world around us.
Yeah, and we have.
Yeah.
We've cured human diseases. We have medications that relieve human suffering, et cetera, without relieving the sufferer or life. So there are many things. So yeah, but I think this is a good place to kind of wrap things up, because I think this is the logical outcome of the kind of materialistic naturalism you were talking about. We have disenchanted the world. There's no mystery left. It's all just data, as you said. It's all just numbers. We're just computers made of meat. We're just the next stage of the evolutionary cycle, and now we'll go on and evolve to a new species that has less impact on the world, as long as you got electricity. Because I don't know how you keep a post-human alive without a computer plugged into electricity, but we'll have to figure that out later. But it's the result of nearly a millennium now of or 500 years anyway, of reducing ourselves as imagers of God, reducing ourselves to just pieces of meat on the floor of the pristine environment. And so I think that's why your work is so important at Merely Human and the other places that you work, because there's a mystery to be communicated about what it means to be human, a beauty that's to be communicated about what it means to be human. After all, God made us. He doesn't make junk, as they say. He's an artist, and he made us, and he made the world as an artist would make it, with all of its diversity and all of its beauty, and even the things that we sometimes think are maybe less than beautiful are here to highlight, if you will, both our creatureliness and his glory. So I think, I think we have to recover and rehabilitate a generation, as you're doing in your work with students, and as I've tried to do in university classrooms as well. We have to rehabilitate a generation or two who will fall in love again with our humanity, not in a narcissistic way, of course, but in a way that appreciates our embodiment, our limitations, as good gifts from God, not as part of the curse. Our embodiment is not a result of the curse. Our limitations are not a result of the curse. Jesus had limitations in his humanity. He was the perfect God-man.
Yeah.
Our dependency on others and on God is not a part of the curse. Our appreciation of and need for community is not a part of the curse. Those are good gifts from God, and we've got to recover that if we're going to pass on a truly human future to generations to come.
And there's something, one of the things that I have over the last decade spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to find ways to articulate in presentations and writings or whatever. And it's something that's been personal to me. And not just personal, but as I evaluate it, was the recognition of as you get older, you start to obviously recognize that, like my kid, I tell my kids, it's your time now, right? You're rising. I will diminish. That's the way this works. I stewarded you in your early years. You were never something that belonged to me. You were an individual, unique individual, and God gave me the opportunity to steward you and to help hopefully put you in a position so that when the generation that preceded you starts to diminish in our impact on the world, yours grows, and you can take the message of love and grace and mercy to the world and be a representative of Jesus Christ. My time is ending and yours is beginning. But at the end, like, and I think this is so great because you can go back to the Hippocratic Oath as it originally existed, right? There was the generational, in the Hippocratic Oath, there was generational recognition. There was the recognition of he who taught me this, and that I owe that person, the person that set the stage for me to be able to do the things that I do, a lifetime of gratitude that will express itself as treating them as important in my life, and that I will take care of them with the things that I have. And I will take what they gave me and I will give it to the generation that follows me faithfully, so that what they gave me doesn't end with me, but goes to the next generation. And that line goes all the way through the Bible as well, right? We have a responsibility to the people who came before us because they were the ones. And the Bible is so powerful in its generational messages, and our need to remember what the generation for us did before we got here, and our need to pass on the things that are most important to those that are coming after us. And I think when I was an atheist, I saw the brevity of life as something that made life meaningless. You know, when I was an atheist, it was like, I will be here as a carbon blip on a tiny little rock, and I will exist for this tiny little section in the universe, and it's all meaningless and with no purpose. And then after I came to know Christ and got in this relationship, the idea that human beings mattered when I hear atheists tell me the universe is so huge, Jay, how can you believe it matters? Like, I don't understand it either, but he tells me I do, and I see it in my life all the time. And that is the miracle for me, and that he cares about us as individuals when everything is so immense and powerful and huge and beyond me. And so all of a sudden, the brevity of my life became something that, instead of communicating meaninglessness to me, it communicated importance to every moment that we have. Which is like Dostoevsky said after what he went through with his trial and ultimately being able to survive his execution. He said it's impossible to live life appreciating every moment like that. But it is a reality that you have to be aware of, that every single moment that you live is something that is a gift and should be impregnated with that purpose of other human beings in it. So God said, love him and love others. So that's the entire motivation for talking about all this. What you just said, I think, is so vitally important and beautiful. I love the word beautiful. It's beautiful to think that we have to fall in love, regain our love for what it means to be a human being, to stop seeing only the negative, and to re-embrace this idea that God made something good. The curse corrupted elements of it, but there are elements of it that were made and purposed for his good. And it's all tied up into other human beings. It's not our glory. It's not the things that we pursue. It's the people that God puts us in front of on a daily basis that ultimately give us that joy. I'm going to give you the last word here.
The last word's easy. I just thought of it as you're talking. There's a wonderful Yiddish toast, l'chaim, to life. So l'chaim.
L'chaim. Yep, and JD's toasting as well. All right, Ben, thank you so much for coming on. You are welcome. If you ever have 3 things that you want to bounce around with me, just reach out, and I may chase you down again at some time in the future to talk about physician-assisted suicide. Okay. But God bless you, sir, and all that you do, and you are appreciated.
Well, thanks. Likewise. And have a great day. And this was a great opportunity for me, and just to chat with you, Jay. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Bye now.
Bye now. For listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of the Human Things Podcast 2.0, Season 2, Episode 2, with Dr. Ben Mitchell talking about AI. More to come this season. If you have enjoyed the content that we're creating, and if you are looking forward to that content coming, please subscribe, go to our website, be willing to offer financial support. And we will continue to produce this. We are committed to this, and we are having a good time. And I did get some feedback from somebody that said they wanted me to make a t-shirt for the people that I said, shut up and give me your money to, at the end of, I think that was season 1. So I don't think we're going to do that, and I'm not going to make that refrain every time. But I will say, I don't know who you were that gave anonymous gifts. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the anonymous. We got a couple of really nice anonymous gifts. But if it came because I said shut up and listen or shut up and give us money, that's awesome too. In all seriousness, we have already received support. And we appreciate every bit of it. And we're going to make every effort with the gifts that you've given us to produce material that will be useful to people. And we are going to mine the old episodes and bring some more stuff out for you. And I'm running down relentlessly guests of a high quality, hopefully to bring to you on future episodes as well right now. But I can promise you this, the next episode, as far as I know, will be Jay Watts alone again on purpose. It isn't just because I couldn't get anybody. It's on purpose. I have stuff to say, and we'll cover it then. Thank you for joining us again. Subscribe, support. God bless.